Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Hugh here at Loxone and this is the second of our foundation series webinars. So we're going to be doing a complete series of webinars over 10 webinars looking at Loxone Config and how to completely configure a Loxone system. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my screen with you now. Here we go. Just move everything out of the way for me so I'm not distracted by anything else on the screen. In our previous webinar, I gave you an introduction to Loxone. So an introduction of us as a company, of what we do, how we do it, and an overview of some of our core products and lineups. Today, we're going to start looking into the nitty-gritty. This is going to be the day where we start getting an introduction into config itself. So today is going to be an introduction of config, of what we can do in config, how we connect to a mini server, how we start configuring a system. And then from tomorrow onwards, we're going to look really nitty gritty into doing each and every bit of config. So for today then, this is our agenda. So we are going to be taking an overview and a look into inputs and outputs, what both of them mean, what each of them does, and how they work within Loxone. We're also going to be looking at config basics. So how config works, how it's laid out, and where we need to put various things. We're also going to be looking at some lovely little tools that we have in config as well that we can use to try things and test things out. And then finally, we're going to end with connecting to a mini server. Now, I'll show you at the end as well, but what I have with me, if I just switch the camera over, is I have, come on camera, there we go, I have a demo case, and this is what I'm going to be using throughout this entire series to be configuring things on. It's going to be a great tool. We'll even start using it today, and I'll start making some of the inputs work with some of the outputs. If you would like one of these, just get in touch with us. At the very end slide, you will see who you can contact from our office to get your hands on one of these. All right, let's get started then. So I asked everyone who was with us yesterday to get prepared by having config installed. So for any of you that haven't already done that, here's your opportunity to do quickly while I'm still talking. So Loxone Config is, as it says there, the ultimate tool for a professional to provide ready to install functionality to create intelligent automation. It is our bread and butter. The two things that make up Loxone fundamentally and make us unique and special is the mini server and Loxone Config. Those are our two core aspects. And so there is the link where you can always download the latest release of Loxone Config. So loxone.com, ENEN, which is the UK site, support downloads. And from there, you can download Loxone Config. We also usually have a public beta version available. So this is a version that you wouldn't stick on a customer's house, but you could put on your own house or on your demo case to try out new features and new things that may be in there. So hopefully now everyone has had an opportunity to grab that link if you haven't already got config. Otherwise, let's get started. So on my laptop here, I am going to open up Loxone Config. So this is my version of config. Now, the date today for me live is the 2nd of April 2020, and our current release version of config is 10.3.11.27. And this here is your front screen of config. And what we have here on the left-hand side is all of the available things we can do. We can see a list of all the projects we have on this laptop. We can start a new project. We can start something called project planning, which I'll show you later in the series. We can open a project file if we, for instance, had one on a USB stick that we needed to pull onto a new laptop. We can search for mini servers. So if there's a mini server on the same network we are on, we can search for it, or we could manually connect to a mini server. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a new project. So if you do have config open on your laptops and you want to follow along with me, please do. I encourage you to follow along as we go along so that this is working for you as well and you can see everything working. So we're going to start a new project. And when you start a new project, you have the option of which mini server to choose from. You'll see that there are 3 options. We have a Miniserver Go, and a Miniserver Gen 1. And you'll see as you switch between the 3, the image here changes to show you which one you're going to be using. The Miniserver is our latest generation of Miniserver. For any new build property that's going to be hardwired, the Miniserver is your go-to choice. The Miniserver Go has Air, our wireless technology built in, so is a perfect option for retrofit. And the Miniserver Gen 1 is our previous generation of the physical hardwired Miniserver. That's also the generation that is in my demo case over here. So for my project, I'm going to be using a Miniserver Gen 1, and I would encourage you to do the same as well. Then I'm going to choose Next. And on the following page, I get the option to give my project a description. So this is a name for the project. So I'm going to call mine Foundation Series. We can also specify where this file gets saved to locally. So the great thing about a project file is it doesn't only exist on the Miniserver. It exists wherever you've saved it on your laptop as well. Now, by default, this will of course be a folder in your documents. If you have something like Google Drive or OneDrive, some cloud storage, you could just save straight off to the cloud if you wanted to. And then something that I always do is I tick Create Project Subfolder. And what that does is that creates a separate folder within this folder structure for every new project I create. Just makes it a little bit easier and a little bit neater. So I always prefer to do that. On the next bit, we put the author details. The author is you, or in this case, me. The person making the project is the author. So here we go. Telephone number, name, email address. And if you want, you can put in your website. And if you wanted to as well, you could also import a logo. So if you have a company logo, you could upload this here, and there is a section within the app that you can see the author details or the installer details, and you could have your logo displayed there as well. And then at this section, you put your customer's details in. So this is the person that you are doing the system for. So my girlfriend is very lucky. She's about to have a Loxone system installed. I'm, however, not going to put my home address in. I'm going to put our UK office address in here. So street, country code, postcode, and city. Where it says city, you can put a village or a town in as well. It will recognize it. The reason for these is GPS data, because part of the magic of Loxone is provided it has an internet connection, it can use the address to pull certain GPS data like sunrise, sunset, and many, many more. It can become very, very useful later on in config. On the next screen, we have users for the Miniserver. And by default, there will be one user in there, and that is a user called admin. And that user, their default password is also admin. So every Miniserver out of the factory comes with a default username of admin and a default password of admin. So this Miniserver right here is admin, admin. The reason I am going on about this so much is because it is obviously a very, very bad idea to leave a Miniserver with default credentials, especially if you plan on creating remote access for this for the customer to use remotely. So I'm going to change this admin password. I'm going to make mine demo case, all one word, all lowercase, because that's what I'm using. I'm using a demo case. So for me, this is going to be demo case. Feel free to use the same, or if you have your own admin password you want to use, please feel free to use that as well. But one really, really important thing, if you forget this admin password, there isn't really a backdoor. If you have the config file on your laptop, then you could format the SD card and save your config back into it. But if you don't have the config file on your laptop and you can't remember the admin password, you're pretty much at the point where you'd have to format the SD and start again. So please always take a note of your admin password, don't forget it. And then we also on here have a second password level called the user interface password. This we will come on to later in the series, but certain functions, for instance, a burglar alarm, you may not want anyone to just be able to open the Loxone app on your phone and turn your burglar alarm off. As a key example, if I had an iPad on the wall as I walked into my house to do my intercom, all it would take would be a half-intelligent burglar to break in, go, oh, there's an iPad here, burglar alarm, disarm. And so what user interface password does is essentially a second layer of authentication for certain blocks within the app. And so I'm going to put a user interface password in here of 1234. Again, nice and secure. And then the last thing I'm going to do on this page is just create one extra user, just to show that you can have multiple users for the system. And we will come on to users later on in the series as well. So I'm going to create one user for me, and I'm just going to give me a unique password that is all mine, and a unique user interface password that is all mine. And for every additional user that you create, you have an available tick box here called administrator. If they are not an administrator, they cannot get into config. If they are an administrator, they can log into config. And then we're going to go next. And then on this page, we get to specify the rooms of this building. So what we can do in here is we can give a name, a type, a rating, choose whether it's a favorite, an icon, and a room size for all of the rooms we have within this building. Doesn't matter whether it's a house, an office block, whatever. I am just going to leave all of the rooms that are ticked by default. I'm just going to leave them as they are. I'm not going to bother with adding rooms or removing rooms. I'm just going to leave the defaults ticked. So by default, we've got bedroom, kitchen, landing, living room, outside, WC, and whole house ticked. Actually, I'm going to tick bathroom as well, just because I probably want to have a bathroom. As well as the room, you've also got room types. Now, room types are quite important for certain default functionality. Room types we have available are recreational rooms, bedrooms, thoroughfares, other, and central. Now, all of those, apart from other and central, are probably fairly self-explanatory. A bathroom is a recreational room. We spend a period of time in there. A hall would be a thoroughfare because we just walk from one room to the next. Other is really for any room that doesn't fall into one of the other categories. So in this example here, garden is a brilliant example of a room that would be other. And then a room type of central would be for the room whole house. And the reason that we've got whole house is its own independent room. And this could be central or whole office or whatever the building may be. But the reason it's there is that there will be some things that aren't specific to one room, but are specific to the building as a whole. Again, something like a burglar alarm is a great example. A burglar alarm doesn't only exist in your living room, it exists for the whole property. And so you should always have a room in there that's a central room type and give it a room name like that as well. The star rating dictates the order and the layout of the tiles within the app. The tick box under favorite dictates whether this room is a favorite room within the app. You can assign an icon for all of your rooms, which displays within the app as well. And then finally, you have the option for room size. And room size is one that I would like to linger on for a second because room size is critically important. I will just hang the thread there for a second to see if anyone can think of why room size is really, really important for us as an automation system. Anyone got it? Okay, heating. Heating and cooling room size is really, really important for because it goes into a lot of the logic for that. Somebody's actually answered it on the questions and answer box. Well done, Josh. So please remember to set room sizes. I'm just going to quickly whack in some made up room sizes for all of these rooms, just so that I don't have to come back to this point and figure out why my heating isn't working later in the series. Outside obviously doesn't matter particularly because we wouldn't have heating outside, and the same for whole house. There wouldn't be a specific zone of heating in the whole house. Then we go next, and then the final page on creating a new project is giving us some information on how to get started. So just in case you forget any of what we've covered in this webinar, the final page of creating a new project does give you an opportunity to do a Miniserver search or to go to online documentation to refresh your memory. Somebody has just asked if room size is in square meters. Good question. Yes, it is. The room size on the previous page is in meters squared. Click finish. And this then creates the project file for us. So this is a new project on our laptop. At the moment, it exists nowhere except for our laptop. And before we get started with inputs and outputs connecting to demo cases and things like that, let's just have a quick overview of how this page here works. And so what we have, the project page is broken up into 3 separate panes. This pane here over on the left-hand side is your preferences, your parameters. So for everything I select, this pane will change to show me the parameters of the thing that I've selected. So if I were to select, for instance, the Miniserver in the middle list, you can see that the parameters pane here changes to show me something that's fundamental to that. If I select this page over here, again, it changes to reflect that. So that's our parameters. As we go on throughout the webinar series, if I ever ask you things related to timeouts or timers or, nitty-gritty little bits of logic and detail, 9 times out of 10, you will find that in parameters. Moving on to our middle pane. Our middle pane is the periphery list. This is a list of all of the available things we have to configure with. So in here, you'll see a list of your rooms, those rooms that we've just created. You will see users and user groups. You will see operating modes, operating times. You'll also see this object here. This is the Miniserver. Because even though I haven't physically connected to a Miniserver and saved in anything for it yet, I've already told this project file that I'm going to be using a Miniserver Gen 1, and so it's already added one into the periphery list for me. And if you expand it, you will see that all of the available inputs and outputs you have on the Miniserver are already there listed underneath it, ready and waiting to configure with. So if I just quickly switch back to my demo case, just to give you a quick overview of what we can see on config versus what we can see on the demo case. If we take a look, starting from the beginning, it says digital inputs. Digital inputs, and this is something that I love about config, you'll see that there's a color next to all of these. So green next to digital inputs, orange next to analog inputs, red next to digital outputs, black next to analog outputs. And on the physical Miniserver, you'll see that the connector blocks are also color-coded. So you'll see that the digital inputs, which is this top row of green connector blocks here, which are connected to my DIP switches, are color-coded green. My analog inputs are color-coded orange, my analog outputs are color-coded black, and my digital outputs are color-coded red. So that color coding in config follows through to the physical hardware itself as well. It just makes it really, really easy to recognize what you are configuring with. And if I switch the camera back to me, the third and final pane that we have here in config is our pages. Our pages is where all of the magic happens. This is where we pull in inputs and outputs, tie them together and make everything work. Because until there is something on these pages here, nothing would really happen on our Miniserver. And then before I start explaining inputs and outputs and the differences between them, the final bit on config is the ribbon at the top. So this ribbon all the way along the top here. Again, it will change depending on what you've selected to show you the most relevant options for it. So if I select the Miniserver, you can see that the ribbon changes to show me the relevant options for the Miniserver. Whereas if I select the page, it shows me the relevant options for configuring on a page. Brilliant. I hope that has given you a quick little insight to begin with on how config is laid out. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's start explaining inputs and outputs, what they mean and what they do. And so again, to do this, I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen and I'm going to switch my webcam over to the demo case so it is nice and big for everyone to be able to see. So this here is my demo case. I'm just going to straighten it up because I have massive OCD. In the demo case, again, we have a Miniserver, we have a tree extension, an airbase extension, and an RGBW dimmer. So the Miniserver is the brains. You always need a Miniserver. The tree and the air, these are extensions. So these connect to the Miniserver to give us additional functionality. And then this dimmer here controls this LED strip at the top, and this is a tree device. So this actually connects to the tree extension here, as do the motion sensor and the touch switch. These are both also tree devices. On the Miniserver, at the bottom, power in. So this is 24 volt DC, power in. The blue connector is the link connector. So for anyone watching the webinar yesterday, link connects the Miniserver to extensions. So you'll also see this same blue connector on the tree and on the airbase extension as well. So the three of those are connected together to connect the Miniserver to the extensions. Miniserver network cable at the top. You will see that my network cable goes off to a switch that I have on the desk. By default, when you buy a demo case from us, it'll come connected with a network cable here, and there's actually a Wi-Fi router underneath the lid of the box. And then the Wi-Fi router, the Wi-Fi network name is the serial number of the Miniserver, which is on this label here. Back to the Miniserver. These green connectors, as I said, these are digital inputs. So the green connector block at the top are digital inputs. Now, what digital means is it has two available states, on or off, 0 or 1. Can only be in one of those two states, on or off. So an example of a digital input, and there's a great example of a digital input right in this case here, is this door contact. That's digital. It can't tell us how open the door is. It tells us that the door is either open or it's closed. And that door contact is wired in the case to digital input 8. You can actually see it's just written there as well. So that's an example of a digital input. Analog input, by comparison, is a value. So an example of something that would be analog would be something like brightness, because brightness isn't there or not there, it's a specific level. And so that is what an analog input is. Our analog inputs on the Miniserver are 0 to 10 volts. You can correct that if you have a sensor that reads within that range, but that is its read range between 0 and 10 volts. Then we move on to the outputs. These are analog outputs. So again, if we need to control something that is variable. My best kind of example of an analog output would be sometimes when we buy LED drivers, they are 0 to 10 or 1 to 10 volt dimming drivers. So you provide a 1 to 10 or 0 to 10 volt signal to say how bright you want the light. And that is an analog output. And then at the bottom, the red ones are digital outputs. Electricians, security installers, many other electrical trades will probably refer to these as relays. This is what they are. Digital outputs, relays, synonymous for each other. Again, have two states, either on or off. Now, I quite often see that some people struggle with the difference between an input and an output. I see it quite regularly on training courses, understanding the difference between an input and an output. And to me, I always explain it that if you picture the Miniserver and you think in the way that a Miniserver thinks, an input is something that has an effect on the Miniserver. This Miniserver here cannot control whether these inputs are on or off. It has no control over that. My physical hand in the real world, that controls the state of the input. The Miniserver can only look to see what current state they're in. And then the Miniserver will get the state of all of the inputs it has on it, and it will then control an output. So an input has an effect on the Miniserver then has an effect on the outputs. The Miniserver can then control the output, whereas my physical hands, I can't. So that's always how I understand the difference between inputs and outputs. And then once you've understood the difference between inputs and outputs, you just then need to understand the difference between digital or analog, on or off, or a value. Brilliant. Please, as well, as we continue going along, if you've got questions, ping them over in the Q&A box and Philip can answer them as we go along. And then I'm going to go back to my screen here and back to the camera on me. And now that we've understood inputs and outputs, we can see them here on our screen, as well as having then seen them physically on the mini server. Let's get down to our most basic form of configuration, connecting an input to an output. So in a most basic form would be something like this. And with all of the available inputs and outputs and anything you have in your periphery list that you can configure within Loxone, to make it work, you click and drag. So if I start with input 1, which is the toggle switch at the top, the first toggle switch at the top of my demo case, click and drag it onto a page. And that's input 1 on there. If I then take output 1, so the first relay on my demo case, and drag it out onto the same page, I've now got those onto the page ready to configure with. And configuration in Loxone is done with lines. So if I hover my mouse over the little green blip on the input, you'll see it turns to a hand. If I then click and hold and drag to the orange on or the red on the relay and let go, a line is drawn between them. And that there is our most basic form of configuration, an input connected to an output. And again, I'm just going to pause there for a second, and I'm going to switch to my webcam as well. Oh, sorry about that. I think my laptop froze for a second. Yep, so pause there for a second just to let anyone try and figure out what this would do. So if I press that digital input, would my relay turn on permanently, or would it only turn on for the period of time that the input was held? And the answer is this config here would only turn the output on for the period of time that the input was held. That's what it would do. And we can actually see that. Another great tool we have in config is something called simulation. So I can press simulation here and I can test and see things happening without having any physical hardware available. So I'm not connected to this demo case yet, but even so, I can press buttons, press inputs in config and see an output activate. So you can see there, when I press input 1, output 1's going on, but only for the length of time that the input is pressed. And so this config in reality doesn't really work, doesn't really have much effect. If we think about this logically and how a real house would work, this would be like me walking up, and if I wanted lights to turn on in my living room, my lights would only be on for the amount of time that I hold the switch down for. That's silly. We would want to be able to have a way in which we can say, if this input is pulsed, then the output turns on and stays on. So instead of the output following the input will latch. And this is then when the next bit of config comes in, which is function blocks. So config is based on the principle of a PLC, programmable logic control. And so this is where function blocks comes in. Function blocks are the building blocks to make magical things happen. And so what I have the ability to do is add function blocks at this top ribbon here. And from here, there are loads. There are about 160 odd function blocks in Loxone Config. One of the more basic ones though, buttons and switches. And of all of these, we have a function block called switch. This function block is one of our core function blocks. And what it does is it works exactly like a light switch in the real world. If I tie an input onto the trigger and an output onto Q, so on any function block, all of the left-hand side is where you put your inputs and the right-hand side is where you put your outputs. So I've got this switch block now, and if I go back to simulation what this switch block now does, and in simulation as well, for inputs, you actually have the ability to change whether it's displayed as a push button or a switch. So I'm going to change this input to a push button. So if I just push this input, it switches the output on. So the input's now off, but it's switched the output on. And this would be like my physical finger tapping a switch. Me tapping the switch changes the position of the switch, which turns the output on. And then if I tap the switch again, the output turns back off. And so this is the first of the function blocks that we would use within config. Wonderful. So at that point, let me switch back on to me for the camera. Somebody's just asked how you delete the link between an input and an actuator. It's a good question. What you do, take your mouse, hover over until the little hand appears again, and then do a single left click, and that will remove the line. And then you're free to redraw that line again. So that is how you can remove one of those links. So now that I've shown you simple config with an input, an output, and a function block in between, let's move on to actually getting this onto this demo case, saving it in and seeing this working in real life. Because at the moment, all I'm doing is simulating it. So what I do for this, at the ribbon, at the top of config, you have this option for connect. If you press this little drop down here, a little magnifying glass shows up that says search. And when you press that, it will look out across the network that you're on and see all of the available mini servers on that network. And as you can see in our building, we have two available mini servers. We have our main mini server, which runs this whole building. I obviously don't want to connect to that one. And I have this second one here. Ignore the name, it's because I've used it before. This one here is my demo case. The reason I know it's my demo case is because it shows me the serial number here, and that same serial number is written on the sticker in my demo case, and is also on a sticker on the back of the physical mini server as well. So here's my mini server. I'm going to put in its username and password, which remember by default is admin. And then I have a couple of options. I can either connect to it or I can do an initial setup. And to explain how the two of those work, if this is a brand new config file with no configuration done on it yet, and you want to do all of the configuration live and save in as you go, do an initial setup. And what an initial setup will do is give you the opportunity to set things like time zone and location of the mini server, and it will also automatically look across the link of the mini server to find all of the extensions that are already connected, and it will pull them into your config file for you. If, however, you've got a pre-done config file where you've pre-added devices, extensions, and pre-done config, then choose connect. And I'm going to choose connect because that's what I've done. I've already started building some config. So I'm going to press connect. It'll then try and establish a connection. And there we go. When it successfully establishes it, you can see here, this is now changed from saying to connect to saying disconnect. And my top ribbon here is telling me what's happening. So this ribbon here is telling me that I'm locally connected to this mini server. And it's also telling me that currently the program isn't identical. And what this means is what I see on my screen is not the same as what's on this mini server. And to make it the same, I need to save in. So you've always got these two options when you're connected to a mini server of save in and load from, because any change you make on this screen is not in the mini server until you save it in. Now, a quick rule of thumb on a new system and a new mini server, always do a save in before you do a load from, because otherwise you may load out some German that's lingering in there. So always save in to a new mini server. And from that point, you're good to load from. And the reason that load from exists is because you may hand over this project and the customer then may start altering things on their system, like their lighting moods, their heating config, various things like that. And if you just plod along the next time you're there and make a quick change and save in, you could overwrite some of their changes. So you could do a load from first to pull all of their changes onto your laptop, then make your changes and save back in again. And now that I've saved in, you can see that I've got a green heart symbol. and my program is now identical. And now that I've saved in as well, if I swap over my camera again, watch this magic. So the outputs here on a demo case are wired into little LEDs. So if I flick digital input 1, look at that. Output 1 turns on. If I flick it again, output 1 turns back off. On, off, on, off. So now that I've saved into the Miniserver, what you see here on my screen is now live in this system. And the next really, really cool thing, simulation is brilliant because with simulation, you don't have to have any physical hardware available. All you have to have is config installed and you can test out all of your configuration. There's another option in here called Live View. So under the Testing tab, start Live View, and that shows you what's physically happening on the real system. So if I press this input now, you'll see on Live View, it shows that input going live and it shows that relay going on. Press it again, you can see the input go live and the output go off. So Live View, super powerful tool as well. Powerful for testing things, powerful for seeing things happen in the real world. It's an amazing tool. And with Live View, you actually have two different options with it. You can just start basic old Live View, in which you just see what's happening for real. Or you could press this little arrow here, and that offers you the option to start Live View with manual value adjustments. And if I choose this, it's going to come up with a big old warning for me, telling me that I can break things if I do anything wrong in here. Yeah, that's fine. Allow. And what this gives me the ability to do is it actually kind of mixes simulation and Live View into one place. So I can now actually press this input in config and it will activate the relay in real life. So I can now press inputs in Live View in config and it works as if I was really pressing them in real life. So again, another hugely, hugely powerful tool. And that, I think, pretty much covers today's quick overview of config. I'll leave my screen up. I'll go back to the last couple of slides I have to show you. So I'll leave my screen up. I'll go to the last couple of slides I have to show you, and then I'll revert back to showing my config screen. And then we'll have 10 minutes at the end for anyone to ping over any questions, and we can get them answered for you. So the key things to remember in config: parameters, periphery list, the pages where we actually do our configuration, and then any inputs and outputs we want to use, we drag them out and we add function blocks in between. And function blocks are the things that make clever things happen, that turn them from being dumb inputs and outputs into something that's clever. And then we click and drag to draw lines in between. And then we must always remember on every change we do to save in the Miniserver to make it happen live on our system. So back to my slideshow. We've covered that. So a quick highlight of what we've looked at. So any project that you create in your config can be saved locally / on the cloud, as well as in the Miniserver. So even if I don't know, let's say you needed to swap a Miniserver out for whatever reason, or you were swapping a Gen 1 Miniserver to a Gen 2, so the new Miniserver, you've got that project file on your laptop, you can just save it in. Front page of config shows all of the projects that you've done on that PC, as well as being able to create a new project. Remember to choose the correct Miniserver when you create a project. You can convert them within the config file, but it's usually a good option if you start with the right one to begin with. And remember, you've got 3 options: Miniserver Gen 1, Miniserver, or Miniserver Go. Remember to change the admin password. Please, please, please always change the admin password. Room sizes are important and they're in square meters. They're used for heating and cooling logic. The project page is separated into 3 panes: parameters, periphery list, and the page for our config. An input is something that has an effect on the Miniserver, and output is something that the Miniserver affects. All configuration and logic can be tested in simulation, even without the physical hardware available. When you have physical hardware available, you can use live view and see things happening live. And then function blocks are our building blocks to greatness. And there is a quick snapshot of live view. And you'll see there, that is what we're going to be coming on later in the series. But even when it comes to things like our touch switches, in simulation, that's actually simulation, sorry. In simulation, it'll actually open up a diagram of the touch switch. You can press a specific point on it. Super, super powerful tool. And this really sums up all of the powerful software that we have available for Loxone. And that's my slideshow done. As I've said many, many times before, and I'll continue to say, throughout this webinar series, I'm going to be using this demo case that I've shown you already to do all of my configuration on. If you would like a demo case yourself, there's the person you need to contact. Please make a note of Megan's details, ping her over an email, give her a quick call, and she can get you sorted with a demo case. And then you can have one side by side with me to work on as we go through the webinar. We are still getting UPS collections, so we could have one out for you today if you wanted. Now that I've shown you that, I'm going to move back over to my config screen just in case it jars any of your memories. One final thing for me to finish on before we get onto the questions from everyone is, now that I've connected to a Miniserver and saved something in, if I head over to testing here and press web interface, then that'll open up in my default browser this. This is our web interface, which mirrors the app. And already I have a working app. Look at that. I've already got a switch in here, which already turns my output on and off on the Miniserver. So just by adding that function block there, it's added it to my app. Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Please remember to tune in for all of the rest of our webinar series as we look more and more in depth into things we can do with Loxone. As I said, that's the end of today's webinar, but I will be staying on the line for another 10 or so minutes. If you've got any questions, ping them over in the questions box and we will get them answered. Thank you very much, everyone. See you tomorrow.